everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me.
This is some of those little ones' tracks that's in here. I come back up here today to cast these. They look like they're about 9 inches long. They're pretty good little tracks.
As a former forestry worker, Paul Freeman was a skeptic of the Bigfoot phenomena. This all changed one day as he was trailing an elk herd and came face to face with a lone Sasquatch while in the Washington State forest. Paul Freeman then dedicated a large portion of his life to the Bigfoot phenomena, tirelessly searching for this incredible being. He would spend countless days and weeks in the wilds attempting to substantiate what he saw, to prove to the world these incredible creatures exist in the wilds of North America. Paul Freeman's efforts were finally rewarded in the early 1980s in Washington State when he just happened to be in the right place at the right time to capture the elusive Sasquatch on film.
Can't see much up through here. I hear the brush popping and stuff. Oh, there he goes. Jesus.
While Paul Freeman's life was punctuated by detractors and skeptics, Paul stood behind his amazing work and video evidence throughout the rest of his life. His video and evidence still stands today as some of the most compelling evidence of the existence of some large humanoid being existing in the wilds of North America. While Paul Freeman is no longer with us, his son Michael has taken up the mantle of his father's work to present it to the world. Michael's efforts have truly been instrumental in not only perpetuating his father's legacy, but in breathing life and understanding of his father and the struggles he faced in bringing these truths to the world. On this episode of the Paranormal Portal, I sit down with Michael Freeman to learn about his incredible father and get a behind-the-scenes look into his incredible journey. Prepare to enter the Paranormal Portal. Hey everybody, welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I have a wonderful show lined up for you guys today. Pretty exceptional guest is joining us, and this is a gentleman I've met a few times. Wonderful guy, very solid, and he's got a hell of a legacy that he's upholding because he is the son of Mr. Paul Freeman, who is an iconic figure in the Bigfoot world and has really helped to substantiate the existence of these incredible beings in the wilds of North America. And I am speaking, of course, of Mr. Michael Freeman, who is joining us today to talk about his amazing father and, of course, just all about Bigfoot. So let's dig into it. Hey, Michael, welcome to the show, brother. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here. I've been waiting for a while to do it, so hopefully we get a good show.
Yeah, we'll have a great time. I have no question about that. You're exceptionally easy to talk to, just as a side note, and I've always enjoyed when we've had a chance just to get together and chat when the few times that we have. But I was like, yeah, I got to get this guy on the show because the stories and the experiences and, you know, the history is so important to this field. And you are a very iconic piece of that, just, you know, in what you're doing now. And of course, growing up in the shadow of an amazing guy. So thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. I wouldn't classify myself as being an iconic. My father certainly was, but since he's no longer with us, I think I'm a manageable
Well, I tell you what, it's exceptionally wonderful to me that you are holding up his work for the world and continue to expand on it in quite a bit, just in the work you've done in looking at his materials and looking at his evidences and working with Doug Hijack and being able to expand on that and to better show the incredible nature of these footages. So it's incredible. But I gotta ask you, as we were talking before, it's like usually I start these shows with "How'd you get here?" But we know how you got here. The question is what was that like growing up as Paul Freeman's son?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. It's a common question that people ask of me, and my kind of introduction into this and my life into this is a little bit different than most people's because I was actually raised, in Bigfoot research from the time that I was 5 years old. That's when my dad had his first encounter. And from that moment forward, it was just part of our life. And it's normal to me, as, unnormal or odd as that might sound to most people. I don't know what life is like not being raised in a family that does Bigfoot research. And so I have a little different, outlook on it, or a little different experience with it. Like, it wasn't a choice for me.
Sure.
It was just something that was there that I was forced to live with. And, it's normal. And, that was my dad, and that's just who he was.
Right. Yeah. Now you had mentioned that he had his first incident when you were 5 years old, and what was his first experience?
Yeah, that was 1982, June 10th, 1982 to be exact. He was working for the Forest Service, the Mill Creek Watershed, Umatilla National Forest, and he was actually on patrol and was on foot following a small herd of elk, and came around kind of an S-curve in an old logging road off of what we call Tiger Canyon Road. They're outside of Walla Walla. And as he came around that corner, one of these things, he called it a critter at the time, stepped off of about a 10-foot embankment to his right that had been clear cut into the road right in front of him, about 60 feet, and stopped to look at him, and changed his life and my entire family's life immediately.
Wow. Now, when you and I were talking before, you explained how he explained it. I thought that was really unique and interesting. So could you go into what he said he saw?
Yeah. His first inclination, the first thing that struck him when he had the sighting was that it was a prehistoric man.
Mm.
So not a human, not a bear, not any other type of an ape, not a gorilla. And he will go on to say after that in interviews that he knew immediately it wasn't a bear.
Yeah.
He knew that it wasn't a man. He knew that it was not a gorilla or any type of an ape that he was familiar with. But to him, it was a prehistoric man that was just more covered in hair than what he imagined a prehistoric man would be. And he said it was about 8 feet tall. So he thought he was looking at an 8-foot tall prehistoric man. And he was close enough to it that he could see its chest moving in and out when it was breathing, and he could see its stomach muscles flexing when it was breathing. And he, clearly in great detail describes seeing the hair on its shoulders and its neck kind of stand on end, like you will see on the hackles of a dog when it looked at him, and he could hear it breathing and kind of making this like guttural type of like growling, sound at him.
That's gotta be absolutely terrifying. For him to be just following elk and suddenly there's an 8-foot behemoth in front of you that defies explanation. I've often tried to wonder what that would be like, and I'm glad maybe that I've never witnessed that, because I think it might keep me out of the woods forever. But it's gotta have really shook his world up, yeah.
Well, it did, immediately, because, as some people don't realize, I guess, is he was not a believer in Bigfoot. He was someone that had, grown up in the mountains, hunting and tracking and trapping, and was raised that way. And when I was a small child around that time period and before, we survived winters on game. And we ate bear and we ate elk and deer and moose and all those things, and fish, of course. And my dad sold pelts, and $2 a muskrat pelt and, these things and beaver. And he was a trapper. And he thought he knew everything that there was to know about what was in the woods. And, immediately was confronted with something that he didn't understand. And as he will say later, in interviews, his brain told him to get the hell out of there, to run. Yeah. But his legs wouldn't cooperate. And he tried to step backward to get away from it. And at that moment, when he stepped backward, he actually hooked the heel of his cowboy boot on a rock and he fell down, and he had previously, before he was on foot, been in his service truck. Was driving a truck and he had parked it to get out and walk. And when he fell down, he lost the keys to his vehicle.
Oh.
And so he had to try to crawl around on his hands and knees to find his keys. And by the time he did, and he turned around and looked back up, this thing had started to walk off.
Wow.
And he watched it walk about 250 yards. His estimate is between 200 to 300 yards. So, 250 yards or so, he watched this thing walk down the road and up a hillside, and eventually it disappeared into the forest cover. But he does describe that it did stop periodically a couple times to look back at him, for whatever reason, make sure he wasn't following or to see what he was doing. And, one of the really nice details we get out of his sighting, aside from what we've already talked about, is that he does mention in that 200 to 300 yard period when he watched it walk, that it leaned forward walking. It had very long arms. And never once did its knees ever straighten out. They stayed bent the entire time. And that's something that his brain picked up on and that he didn't notice. So we have some really nice details about its movement that come from that.
Those events, and you hear events just like that all the time, of these people, first of all, that are very, very well familiar with the wilds that they're in. They've been in them hunting, fishing, exploring, hiking, camping, whatever. And people are confident that they're in a known place. And then something like this happens where, it's just this paradigm burst. They're all of a sudden, they don't know it. And there's this impossible thing happening in their world. And the other thing that really, really boggles my mind is that, by all intents and purposes, we don't know much about these things, but what they seem to exhibit repeatedly is a desire to not be involved with us. Like, they seem to actively avoid and move out of areas or, just generally not have contact with us. But then something like this happens. And in your estimation, then, does it sound, in your father's story, does it sound like this thing was just as surprised as he was that they were now, in close proximity? Or do you think it was a calculated thing? Can you extrapolate any idea about that?
It's really hard to tell
Sure.
with the first sighting. I don't think it was calculated.
Okay.
So I do think that this sighting was probably an accident.
Right.
And from what we think we know, and I will be careful with saying terms like what we know, because
Sure.
honestly, let's be honest, we don't know anything.
Right.
Right? There's no Bigfoot experts.
Yeah.
There's none. We're all just a bunch of guys with opinions, right? Or ladies with opinions. And so from what we think we know of their possible diet and behavior and things like that, most likely, in his mind at least, and I tend to agree, it was probably following the same herd of elk.
Sure. Yeah.
And they just kind of crossed paths. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't seem to be too interested in him. It stops for a second. He, falls backward, falls down. It leaves, and it turns to look at him a couple times to, maybe make sure that he's not following it or whatever. But it doesn't seem overly concerned with what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like it kind of wants to get away from him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't want to engage in any way once it, maybe perceives that he's not a threat,
Sure.
something like that. So it's really hard to extrapolate, like, maybe what the situation was there. And I don't want to say anything that I don't actually, know.
Sure.
Of course, we have a later sighting in his life, 10 years later, that's a little more famous.
Yeah.
And we can extrapolate a little bit more from that because there's some theories there as to what was going on.
Sure.
But with this one, it's hard to tell.
Right.
And, all we really know is that it scared the devil out of him. And when he finally did get back to his truck and he made it to his ranger station, there are on record 2 different people that tried to speak to him that he has no recollection of even seeing.
Oh, yeah.
He just walked past one gentleman who was asking him if he was okay and didn't even hear what he was saying. And then we have another woman that was an employee there that would later testify that he was as white as a ghost.
Oof.
And that's, she witnessed that and that he was, not babbling, but, pretty much just in a different state and was locked in and wasn't even paying attention to other things that were happening, around him.
Yeah.
So.
And one other point about this story that I find really interesting, and this is why I love hearing people's accounts, because I think that, and obviously your dad was an extraordinary observer, because he picked up these real minute details, which I think is incredible. But I before this story, I was always like, is it possible that people could surprise these things? Because when you think of the Wilds, it's their living room, it's their home. That's where they live, and we're just visiting, and they probably know we're there long before we ever become aware of them. But when he noticed that stress response of the hair coming up, like the hackles being raised, and clearly it seems to exhibit that, yeah, it was probably as much a surprise to this being as it was for your dad, and then it just kind of evaluated, well, the guy fell over, he's no worries.
Right.
So he's just like, well, I'm going to go after lunch here, and walked away. But that's an incredible observation. I just think that's really powerful,
Yeah, it is incredible. That first sighting has a lot of really good details, and also we have to remember with that first sighting, it was 1982.
Yeah.
And, we have a lot more since then, prominent accounts and sightings, and we have social media and all this stuff going on. And so back then in 1982, there wasn't a whole lot of history of reported sightings. You had the Roger Patterson, Bob Gimlin film. And that's really pretty much about it for famous Bigfoot encounters,
sure,
that you would see or hear on the news. And so there's not a lot of opportunity unless you're avidly into it and you're reading some of these things that John Green or Renee
sure,
DeHenden and some of these other guys are doing to get insight as to behavior or detail. And so my dad's that sighting has a tremendous amount of detail that has always been a little bit overlooked. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that he reports that we haven't talked about yet is there's a smell that accompanies this thing.
Right.
And he had actually picked up on the smell before he saw it.
Oh, okay.
And it is something that, was a kind of a foul smell. And he will later say that it kind of made him want to turn his head away. But he wasn't necessarily surprised by the smell, because one of the reasons is they had been actively searching for a mentally disabled boy that had gone missing from a family picnic close to the area. And so one of my dad's first thoughts when he was kind of following his elk and he had got the smell was, well, the snow was just melting off in early June in that area. And he thought that possibly, well, today's the day, that he was coming across the decomposing body of this boy.
Sure.
And the other scenario, of course, is that it was, an elk or a bear or a deer or, something like that the forest hadn't swallowed up yet that was decomposing. And so it wasn't necessarily surprising to him.
Right.
But he did say that, it smelled like something that had died that was decaying mixed with urine.
Oh.
So like a musky dead smell is kind of what we're getting there. And you get that description a lot. Mm-hmm. With him, he had just, with his job and what he was doing and with his experience, it wasn't something that made him like stop and turn around.
Right.
But in hindsight, maybe there was something there that made him think, well, this isn't quite right.
Right.
But I think that, it's when you listen to him, it's real close. Like he picks up on the smell and then it's almost like a few seconds later that like this thing steps in front of him. So it's not like he was walking for miles,
right.
And smelling this thing. So it was something that was real close in mind, something like that. But the thought of that boy that had disappeared was so prominent that when my dad did report this sighting, one of the first things the Forest Service did, because, they didn't believe him, of course, but one of the first things they did is they actually issued a search and rescue team with a helicopter to go to the area because they thought that the body of this boy is what my dad was smelling as well. And so a search and rescue team had been issued. And there's some really cool stories that go with that too, that go along with my dad's sighting. And I'll just go ahead and tell one. A gentleman on that team, his name was Art Snow, who was from Milton Freewater, Oregon, which was real close to Walla Walla. And we actually lived in Milton Freewater as well at the time, but he was on that search and rescue team. They actually landed the helicopter a quarter mile away on a ridgetop, and they found what they believe were 3 more sets of footprints that were a quarter mile away on a ridgetop that were overlooking the incident. And he actually made a cast of one of those. But he would later state that there was no way without a helicopter and without leaving any evidence or trace of himself that my dad could have made it up there, or anyone could have made it up there to make these footprints. And so we have some other witness accounts that go along with the sighting.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge moment in the history of Bigfooting, I guess. I mean, it certainly was the genesis moment for his quest then, right?
Well, it was. I mean, to be honest, it was kind of the genesis week, I guess you could say, because we have that on June 10th is the sighting, and he reports it, and the search and rescue team gets issued. And his superiors come down and they make casts of footprints because there are footprints left in the road. They also find footprints kind of from it's like a small creek that's running through the area, side of the road, kind of a ditch or whatever. They find some of the prints there as well. And the snow's just starting to melt off, so we still have snow and we have mud and the road's wet, so we actually get some really good prints from that. And his even though they don't believe him, and they will later kind of, I won't say slander, but I'll say discredit him, the Forest Service, a little bit in the local newspaper and whatnot. His direct superior, Wayne Long was the gentleman's name, does note, and we have this on record as well, that my dad at 6'5" and 250 pounds walking the road where these footprints are found doesn't even begin to make the impression that the footprints had left in the road.
Wow.
And so something much heavier than what my dad was. But I call it kind of the week of the genesis because it was 6 days later after this, June 16th, 1982, my dad is on patrol with a gentleman by the name of Bill Epic, who was another service ranger. And they're on lunch, actually, at a place called Low Canyon, and they're patrolling, and they together come across 40 more footprints. Now, there's no sighting this time. This is only a footprint find, but it's about 40 more footprints. And this is where Grover Krantz comes into the picture, like, for the first time. And what is actually determined from these 40 footprints is that they're 2 different individuals. The first individual, the first set of prints match the prints that were found on June 10th with his sighting.
Oh, wow.
The second set of prints do not match. they're a different individual that's unseen. And if anyone's ever heard of them or seen them or whatever, that second individual is where we get what's known as the Paul Freeman dermals. Oh. And those are the dermal prints that were cast that have the dermal ridges. And along with the dermals was the knuckles. Oh. And so the knuckle cast is actually the handprint of the dermal casts.
Wow.
And of course, those dermal casts became very important. Grover Krantz got kind of, really obsessed with those, and they're in his book. And he took the dermals to the symposium at the University of British Columbia. And he took the original left and right footprint of the dermals to the Smithsonian Institution, which is where they're still at today. The Smithsonian has the original casts of the left and right dermal print.
Wow.
And had basically been proclaiming that this is irrefutable evidence of the existence. We can't fake these. Right. And so June 16th, even though there's no sighting, historically speaking, it might be more important than June 10th because we do get the dermal prints, which are some of, if not the most important, footprints ever found. And it's the first time, that we have a dermal print that has a handprint that matches it as well. And so
that's incredible. Yeah, I had no idea all that history was wrapped into this one series of events. That's incredible.
All within 6 days. So, a lot going on, in that time period, of course. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we had a lot of visitors, which is the first thing that I remember as a child. Is Grover Krantz and Renee DeHinden are really strong memories that I have as a child. And the first thing that I noticed was different was all these I guess I would say now eccentric characters that all of a sudden were around the house, and things like that. So, that's what I noticed is there's just a lot more foot traffic, and my earliest memories of Bigfoot actually are Grover Krantz and Renee DeHinden. And, for everything that happened with Renee and my dad later on in life and all that stuff, I can always say my first memory of Bigfoot is probably Renee DeHinden, to be honest. So,
well, that's incredible. Now, did life change for the Freeman family following this? I mean, was it a really transformative experience for all of you in that way?
Yeah. Life changed. You could say that. Life changed certainly. It came out in the paper, and my dad had went to the newspaper even though he was told not to. The Forest Service basically said, we're not going to talk about this, right? But he did anyway. And which caused problems. And then he was discredited in the newspaper by the Forest Service, and he was actually demoted to a desk job. He was not let to go out and patrol anymore because they didn't want him looking for, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. Wow. He was, given drug tests. He was accused of being drunk on the job, things like that. Anything to basically cast doubt on whatever he was saying existed. They did not want this out there for whatever reason, and this is a organization, that uses Bigfoot as a mascot now.
Yeah.
Right. Type deal. But in 1982, they didn't want to do that. And what ended up happening basically is, some people don't believe it, but it's true, is we took a lot of harassment.
Oh, sure.
After this happened. And my brother, who's 12 years older than me, he was about 16, 17 at the time. He was teased mercilessly. My dad was discredited. My sister was teased. She's 6 years older than me. And our house was vandalized. Wow. We had some people spray paint some stuff on our house, liar and drunk and all these things. There was a window broken out of our house. We got crank phone calls repeatedly to the point that my parents tried to change the phone number, have it not listed in the phone book, things like that. And eventually what happened was And I always say it was probably my mother, to be honest. Is that my dad quit the Forest Service? Mm-hmm. Was not fired. That's a rumor that's out there.
Okay.
He's not fired from the Forest Service. He quit the Forest Service. And my parents sold the house in Milton Freewater, Oregon, and we moved back to Camas, Washington, which is where I was from, and where my mother was from. And so we actually moved back and got away from all this. And my parents started a business and opened their own, deli and smoked meats store down on Main Street in Camas, Washington. And, that was going to be life from there on out. It was going to be good. And that's not what happened. But I often wonder what it would be like if that was what happened and this Bigfoot stuff wouldn't have continued, but so it definitely changed our life for sure.
And it's really tragic that, when you think about it, all he did was report his experience and let people know. And the pushback was so severe and so crippling, I'm sure, to your entire family. And it just seems so unfair that, just letting people know, hey, there's something out here, which you'd think people would want to know. I think, for me, if I'm going to go camping with my family in an area and there's reports of a, 8, 9, 10 foot tall, hairy creature that we have no idea about, I'm probably going to change my plans, but I have the right to make that decision. But, and you got to wonder, is it because of tourism? Is it because of, the dollars that brings in that they're like, don't talk about this. Let's just keep it quiet.
Well, there's a few things that kind of, I think, come into play that don't get talked about a lot in that situation. So sorry if I'm overwhelming everyone with all this information,
Please.
But, it's 1982. It's a small town.
Sure.
Right. And you have to remember that this took place in a government watershed. And so this is not public land. This is government land. Civilians cannot go in there. You can be jailed for trespassing in the watershed. And for those of you who don't know what a watershed is basically it's where the city of Walla Walla and Milton Freewater, Oregon, and the surrounding towns get their water from, is the river. And it's the Walla Walla River and Mill Creek that run through the watershed. And we have this protected area that civilians can't go into, and they can't, pollute the water and things like that. And I just learned last year that not every place has a watershed.
Oh, okay.
That's how I grew up. I just learned that, and I was blown away. I was like, really? Every place doesn't have a watershed that you can't go into, right? And so it happened on government land. And one of the things that happens in this 6-day time period, because of the newspapers and the news that's getting out, is that ABC, CBS, and NBC, the three major news networks, get wind of this. Mm-hmm. They get wind of the sighting, okay, and they want to do a news story.
Sure.
Okay, and so they contact the United States Forest Service, and they ask for permission to do a news story, and they are denied permission to go into the government land and the watershed to film and to do this news story. Wow. Okay, and now in the process of this, 6 days later, we have, the dermals that are found and all this. So this blows up to be an even bigger thing. And what ends up happening is that ABC, NBC, CBS, they actually file through the court an injunction with a judge to override the Forest Service decision so they can get access into this land to do this news story. Wow. And long story short, I won't drag it out, but ultimately they are denied access to it. That news story does not get done. My dad gets discredited in the meantime, kind of. And so we do have a situation of the Forest Service not wanting this to be in the media,
right,
for whatever reason. And of course, I think you have to look at one of the reasons for that is, it's government land, and they don't want, of course, a bunch of people trespassing. Oh. And they don't want a bunch of hunters with guns trying to trespass and go onto this government land, and they're trying to, protect that or whatever. So, I'm not saying they're in the wrong in that situation, but it's all just, it's really more complicated than what most people initially think when they get into my dad and his first sighting, everything that happened around that. Yeah. And the news media being involved and all these things happening, and eventually, if they're not familiar, there's a gentleman by the name of Joel Harden,
Okay.
who was a professional tracker that worked for the United States Border Patrol. And Mr. Harden wrote his own book. It's called Tracker. And in his book, there's a section that is on my father, and so what happens is, this judge that's presiding over this case that's filed by the media, he gives the United States Forest Service, and this is a direct quote, and this is what set this whole thing up, is he gives them 48 hours to prove, and here's the sentence, he gives them 48 hours to prove by way of hoax that the sighting and the prints are not real. Otherwise, he's going to allow the 3 major news networks into the watershed.
Oh.
Okay, so this is where Mr. Joel Harden comes in. He is brought in from the United States Border Patrol. He's a man tracker. He is another government employee. He is not a third party. He is another government employee. He's brought in by the Forest Service to say these tracks are fake. Oh. So the news media does not get allowed in there. And lo and behold, he says the tracks are fake, and the news media does not get allowed in, and that's the end of the story. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we can draw from that what we want, to draw from that. I've never met Mr. Harden. No offense to Mr. Harden. I'm sure he's great at his job. Sure. But I always tell people that, he was another government employee, and I think that he knew why he was brought in. And I think that he did that job effectively. Yeah. If you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
So,
sure.
But yeah, and sorry to backtrack, but yeah, obviously then we moved and we did all that, and we were no longer in the area. It was all done.
Okay.
Until it wasn't.
That's what I was going to say, because the journey for your father definitely wasn't done, right?
Well, it wasn't. It was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be done, and my parents were supposed to live in harmony and have this business, and everything was great. And I had started kindergarten and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, Dad wasn't home on the weekends. Oh. Okay. And then all of a sudden, Dad and my brother were gone for a week at a time. And then all of a sudden, my dad was gone 2 weeks at a time. And what was happening was, my dad was making the, 400 some mile drive back to the Blue Mountains from Camas, Washington, because he couldn't stay away. All right. And what's a detail about this, again, and I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are overlooked kind of today.
Sure.
One of the overlooked details about this situation is that Camas, Washington is right on Mount St. Helens. Oh. I mean, pretty much. I remember when I was 3 years old when Mount St. Helens erupted. Me and my sister, I remember us being outside playing in the gray snow. Like, that's a vivid memory I have was the ashes covering Camas and coming down, before we moved up to the Walla Walla area. We have the Cascade Mountains there. We have, Mount Rainier and Mount Hood, and we have Mount St. Helens, and we have history, especially with like Ape Canyon and stuff, of Bigfoot activity in that area. And my dad doesn't stay there to research. No, he goes someplace where he was basically driven away, and he was outcast as like a pariah and driven away, and drives 400 miles and spends all that time and all that money to go back to the place where he saw it.
Wow.
Because that's the only place he wants to go. Yeah. And this actually is really common with people that have eyewitness accounts, is that they only want to go back to the place that they saw it because they know that they're there.
Sure.
And so my dad was doing this, and it got to the point where my mother was running the deli, and my brother was helping her. My dad wasn't there. It got to the point eventually, it was so bad that my mother gave in, and we sold the house that had been left to her by her mom when she had passed away. And we moved back to Walla Walla, to a place where basically he was a crazy person and we weren't wanted in that area, because he was so obsessed with being there. Right. That I don't think there was no other option at that point in time. Sure. If they wanted to stay a family and they wanted to stay married, because he was going to ruin it. Yeah. And that's the truth. And so in the summer of 1986, we moved back to Walla Walla. Wow. So we were gone about 4 years, and before it just got so much that we had to come back.
Oh, okay. And then how much time elapsed between you guys relocating back there and him eventually capturing the iconic footage.
Well, the footage was shot in 1992.
Okay.
So it was 6 years.
Yeah.
Time elapsed, between that. And he was actively researching, had at that point in time squarely teamed up with Wes Summerlin and Vance Orchard and Bill Lowry and Dar Addington and those researchers, from that area, was working closely with Grover Krantz as well. And, we had a lot of expeditions that were taking place. And in 1987, alone, we had Renee DeHinden twice on expedition. We had Bob Titmus there. We had Peter Byrne there in 1987 as well. All those people. We also had Good Morning America there to do a story with him. And so, by that point in time, he had kind of become a little bit of a celebrity.
Sure.
And he had done a national TV commercial for Edie's Ice Cream, Dreyer's Grand Light, same company. Edie's, Dreyer's Ice Cream. He had done a national TV commercial, some of those things, and kind of had been gotten recognized a little bit, for better or for worse, right, for what he was doing. But of course, everybody knows him for the Deduck Spring video.
Yeah.
In 92, which is, kind of the penultimate moment, I guess you could say, of his research career.
Right. Yeah. And that was really, really incredible to me. I remember the first time I saw that years and years ago, but I was, perusing YouTube or, some site like that, and happened onto that footage. And I'd never heard of Paul Freeman or his amazing footage before, but I literally watched it and I was like, oh, I mean, I don't know what it was about it, but whatever it was, my reaction was very visceral. Like I was just like, oh, because it's like, well, look at these tracks and they following up. He said, well, let's go up here and they look pretty fresh and it must be not far away. And then it's like, oh, there he is. It's like, there he is.
Right.
And you see that hulking figure walking in front of that baby pine, or the not baby, but the sapling pine. And it's like, wow. I mean, it just, to me, that was as iconic as the first time I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film. It was just like, wow, there it is. It really is.
Right.
And I don't know what it is. I don't really think I had a discerning eye at that point to go, well, let's break it down and look. Everybody's got these criteria that they level against. But my gut reaction when I saw that is that is a very real creature. And it's walking right there, right in front of them. And I was like, wow, incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's pretty incredible, One of the funny things about my dad's footage, is I think even more than the footage, I think the audio might be more well known than the actual footage itself, because everybody knows, oh, there he goes. Yeah. Right? That's what he says when it comes out. He says, oh, there he goes.
Yeah.
And my best dad, impersonation, and then he says, Jesus, when the camera drops, when it moves. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. There's I have a sticker on my fridge that I bought that says, oh, there it goes. I didn't make it. Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I meet, they like to say that to me and stuff like that. I've heard it so many times, it's so as iconic as the Patterson-Gimlin footage is, my dad's audio, which we don't have in the Patterson film, right? There's no audio. So that's what separates my dad's. But my dad's audio, I think, is almost as iconic as the Patterson-Gimlin footage.
Sure.
In itself,
Right.
And if you're wondering, for those that don't know, if you've ever wondered, because we don't know where the original, Patterson-Gimlin footage is, right? It got lost, it got destroyed, something like that. Sure. I actually know someone that claims to be in possession of it. I won't mention their name. Sure. It's a bunch of hooey. But for all those who are curious about the Freeman footage,
there it is.
There it is.
There it is.
That's the original. Wow. This is going to the highest bidder, by the way. Right. As long as it's about six figures, they will talk. No, just kidding. This is the original copy right here. Oh. This is 8mm digital magnetic tape. Mm-hmm. It's about the worst technology ever created.
Yeah.
It was convenient for the time.
Sure.
And, that was great. We were all about convenience in the 90s and all this new technology, and you could pop it in the camera and, all this stuff.
Sure.
You can't do anything with it. It's like 400 pixels or whatever it is. If you try to zoom in on it, it turns into a blob. It's actually really difficult to enhance. And so it's taken a long time to work with it. The 16mm footage from 1967 is far superior to 8mm digital magnetic tape.
Sure.
So I wish my dad would have been carrying what Patterson, had on him, but for sure. A lot of people don't realize, with that, they just seem to think that he showed up one day with a camera and turned it on and got video of Bigfoot.
Right.
And that's couldn't be the farthest thing from what actually had happened. He had been given the camera by my uncle, my mom's brother, my Uncle Larry, and who was pretty much my dad's, best friend. And he had given my dad the camera because my dad had been renting cameras from Rent-A-Center, in the late 80s and the early 90s. Sure. And it's extremely expensive, and something we couldn't afford to do. And finally, my uncle gave him that camera. And from that point forward, my dad was filming a lot of things. I mean, I have hours and hours of video footage of my dad filming tracks and filming, wildlife and the scenery, or him pointing over and saying, oh, that's where I had my first sighting, was over in that ridge. And, I can't go over there now because, I'm a civilian these days. They don't allow me in there. Wink, wink, type thing, that he was saying, or my dog running around. I have hours of footage, and in my book that I wrote, I have 2.5 hours of footage in there that you can watch, and in this footage is honestly, it's about 9 minutes. Oh. And so he's filming a lot of things. It wasn't like this is the only thing he ever filmed.
Right.
And he actually had the week that this was shot, because this was shot on a Thursday. It was Thursday, August 20th, 1992. He had been to the location every single day that week already. Oh. And he was looking for tracks. He was, looking for any type of sign that they had been there, because by this point in time, he had narrowed it down over the course of, 10 years, kind of where he thought they might be.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this particular location, Deduck Spring, there's what's called Walden Pond is at this location. And the spring actually comes right out of the ground, about a quarter mile from Walden Pond, bubbles out and runs into it. And the water is fresh and it's cold and it never dries up. And it's one of the most viable water sources in the entire area that is year round. And so by late August, a lot of the water sources dry up. And we have documentation for, 10 years at this point, year after year after year, late August, early September, we're getting either tracks or someone is reporting a sighting in this location.
Oh, neat. Okay.
And so by this time, he was kind of, doing a mapping project, I guess, you could say. And we have the Paul Freeman map, if no one's ever seen it, which is his big, Forest Service map that he documented all his evidence on, all his research on, for like 15 years. All this information went on there. And that map is actually on display at the North American Bigfoot Center. Cool. Cliff Bergman curates it at the moment, and it's on display there so you can go see it. But if you look at this map, you start to see patterns, of course, and he was one of the first people that was doing this.
Oh, that's really
and that doesn't get enough credit either when we talk about my dad. But that map, pretty much directly led to the video footage being shot.
Right.
Because he had an idea of where he thought they were going to be and when they were going to be there. And he had been there every day that week. He had been there at least once a week all summer.
Wow.
And he wasn't having much success, actually. He was going under the cover of darkness very early in the morning.
Okay.
And he would sit in his vehicle and he would kind of watch the pond and watch the area. And then when it became light, he would get out and he would look around, and he wasn't really finding anything, and a disturbance here or there.
Sure.
I think a footprint had been found like a month earlier, something like that, or possible footprint.
Okay.
And he just wasn't having any success. And kind of what happened, my sister, Linda, who is deceased now, she's no longer with us, but she's an integral part of the story, because Wednesday, August 19th, the night before he got the footage, my sister called him on the phone, and her car wouldn't start. It had broken down, and she had to, have her car running to go to work the next day. And she asked my dad if he would come over and fix the car. And he said that he would. And so the next morning, instead of going to Deluxe Spring at, 4:00 in the morning, he slept in a little bit. He got up and went and got a cup of coffee at the Flying J restaurant. He went to my sister's house, and he got her car running. And we think that he finishes this about 9 a.m., right around there, 8:30, 9 a.m. He's on his way home, and he just kind of has this thought, because my mom was at work at the time. She was working at Bi-Mart, and I had friends that had stayed the night, and I had like 3 or 4 buddies that were in the basement with me, and my dad just kind of said, what the hell? I'll go up there anyway. Nothing else I'd rather do. Sure. And it's about an hour and a half drive. And so he gets there around 10:30 in the morning. And so a good 5 hours, if not more, later than what he had normally been, getting there throughout the rest of the week, and literally walks up on one. Jeez. Wow. So thankfully my sister had a car that was, not in good condition, right? If she maintained her car better, probably we wouldn't have the Freeman footage, to be honest with you. And I really do think, and my dad kind of thought as well after the incident, that, they were probably watching him, and they were waiting for him to leave.
Oh, sure.
Before they were conducting, getting water or conducting their activities or whatnot.
Right.
And that day when he wasn't there, when he normally was there, when they were used to him and the pattern was broken.
Right.
And it's some hours later. And this would be, around 10:30. Honestly, he had been leaving around 9:30, somewhere around there, usually, and coming home. So this would just be like a short time after he, had left. And yeah, he walks right up on one, we'll say, right? One. And we now fully believe, of course, that there's a smaller juvenile, or what you'll call a baby, that's in the footage, as well. Sure. That we can see near the end of the footage. But yeah, call it, serendipity or call it luck or call it, luck and research or, whatever you want to call it, mixed together. But yeah, kind of just an odd event that threw him off time is kind of what led to him actually getting the footage.
That is really cool, because, I mean, as you stated, I mean, he had researched and dialed it in already, but they were just watching, and that makes perfect sense to me. And then once he broke that established pattern, they just weren't able to anticipate that. And they were probably like, oh, geez, well, he's here.
Exactly. Yeah. And, we talked about earlier with this first sighting, whether we thought it was, something that was, on accident, or right. something like that. I said, well, it's kind of hard to make that, observation. But I think we have a little more insight into this one, because I truly do think that he surprised them. Right. That day. Yeah. And I'll say them. Sure. But I truly do think that he surprised them. And he has always thought that they most likely were at the pond getting water when he pulled up in his vehicle. Okay. And that when they heard him pull up in his vehicle, that they left the scene.
Okay.
Now, we do know now that there is a small baby in the footage. Yeah. Okay. And we know that the small baby is to the left and back of where the initial Sasquatch is filmed. Okay. Wow. So we know this. And we kind of have, I guess, a guess is the best way to put it as to what happened. I truly believe that the female was hiding from him, that they had bolted when he got there. And as he starts to go down the trail and he's looking at the tracks, I think there comes a point where he gets too close.
Yeah.
And at that point where he gets a little too close to, baby Bigfoot, potentially, I think that's when the female decides to show herself to him. And I think she does so on purpose.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And I think she walks in front of him and she does that head snap and she looks directly at him as she steps in front of that tree. And I've always thought that I think that look that he's given, I don't think it's a friendly look.
Right.
I think it's that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Type thing, and kind of the kill deer theory, where she distracts you from where the baby actually is,
right?
And she goes off in a certain direction. And my dad loses her at that point. He does. He honestly does. He loses her, and the camera goes down, and he spends a few minutes because he's trying to locate with his eyes where this thing went, and it's a little bit later. Mm-hmm. When he picks it up when he sees what he thinks is the second one. He'll say it's the second one,
yep.
Which we believe is the same one. But what he thinks is the second one because it's in an area that is not where he thought she went. And so it kind of surprises him a little bit at that point as well. And she picks up the baby and she's out of there. But no, I think that she comes out on purpose. I think it's a distraction to distract him and to give him a warning. And then she goes and gets her baby and she disappears. Wow. From that point. But yeah, so I guess the point is, the first sighting in 82, I don't know. But the 92 sighting and the footage, I think that, fully showed itself on purpose with intent, because there was a smaller one there.
Sure.
And we kind of get, there's that theory with the Patterson-Gimlin film because she's a female in that film as well.
Sure.
And there is that theory that they think that there may have been a smaller one present.
Right.
And that's what Patty was doing as well. Showing herself was to distract from the fact that there was a smaller one that was somewhere.
Right.
And we now have, I believe as of last year, we now have Mr. Gimlin telling Scott Billette, at least in an interview, that there was a smaller set of tracks.
Oh, okay.
That was there, which it's a lot of years later.
Sure.
But maybe he's never been asked that question before, but he's now clarifying that, yes, there was a smaller set of tracks. And so we do think, it's possible at least. Patty had a smaller one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I there's a couple of things I wanted to mention about that, which is interesting. And maybe the small one wasn't still at the point of breastfeeding, because I don't on the Freeman footage, as I'm recalling your dad's footage, I don't recall there being breasts. But the interesting thing is that I've heard primatologists talk about that, and they're like, well, gorillas don't have noticeable breasts unless they're actively breastfeeding, and if after that period, then they return to a normal chest-looking thing. And unlike humans who retain the breast shape all the time, so it's possible that maybe that little one was beyond the breastfeeding, but was still small enough that.
Yeah, it's possible.
Sure. Again,
I mean, there's a lot of things that are possible. It may not be a female. I mean, I can't say that it is for sure.
Sure.
The reason I refer to her as a female, there's a couple of reasons for it. Okay. Number one is because there is what appears to be a baby that she picks up. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to, I think that's like, I acquaint it, with, okay, it must be a female. Sure. Right? Yeah. She's with the baby. I think we do that, and we don't assume that it's probably with the dad, because a lot of animals in nature, you'll see the babies be with the females more than with the males, right?
Yeah.
The second thing to it is that her footprint is not incredibly large.
Oh, okay.
It's 13 and a half inches.
Okay.
Okay. And I also brought this is her footprint. This is the footprint from the footage.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's 13 and a half inches. It's, about 5.5 inches wide.
Okay.
Right. We have a nice,
deep
mid-tarsal there as well. But she's not incredibly large.
Okay.
And we actually think, based on footprint size, and again, we don't know, right? We're just being our own self-scientists here and drawing conclusions.
Sure.
Probably 6'5".
Okay.
Right around in there. I don't think this is a 7-8 foot animal.
Okay.
I do think it's 400 plus pounds.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Right. But, you know, and there's a lot of people that think Patty's like 7 foot something, whatever. And there's a lot of people that think Patty's like 6'3".
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And somewhere in between there. Patty's a 14-inch foot.
Okay.
This is a 13.5-inch foot. So if those are both correct, and Patty's a female, this fits right alongside with grown female foot, right? Sure. Half-inch smaller, right around there. If they're both maybe 6'6" or 6'5", right, somewhere in there, you know, we'll split Patty in the middle and say she's not 6'3" and she's not 7 foot. Maybe she's 6'6", whatever. Maybe we'll never know.
Right.
It all kind of lines up.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I at least am pretty certain that it's a female.
Sure.
But of course, I could be completely wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't know, right?
Exactly. And I don't mean to try to draw any concrete conclusions, but I just thought that was interesting that, you know, it's very possible that the noticeable breasts versus no noticeable breasts could still be the females, just that in gorillas, they don't maintain them. And that's a higher order of primate as well, just a step away from us, basically. So perhaps there's the same physiology or a similar genetic trait.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. You know, the other thing as well is my dad's footage is not as clean as the Patterson film.
Sure. Yeah.
And she steps out and she walks in front of that Douglas fir that's there, and then there's kind of the tree hide. And then when we see her later pick up the baby, it's from the back. Sure. And so we don't have a real clear image to really know if she has breasts or not. I mean, It appears that she doesn't.
Yep.
But I mean, you know, if it is some type of an ape, which I believe that it is, okay, and we're apes, right?
Sure.
People come in all different shapes and sizes, right, and women come in all different shapes and sizes. That as we know, maybe Patty is more on the Dolly Parton side, and maybe the one in my dad's footage is more on the well, I won't throw any famous women under the bus, but. Yeah. Maybe on the less endowed side, sure. Right? That could be possible too. Yep. And even in that case, if they're pregnant, the breast may not be as engorged, right? They may not appear as large as well. Right. So, I mean, there's all types of sure. conclusions that we can draw from it. Or if they are apes, like you said, where, gorillas don't necessarily exhibit large breasts unless they're actively breastfeeding. Yep. It could be a situation like that. Maybe it is a male, Sure. I don't know. I'll be the first one to say I don't know. Right. But I think a lot, not that it's correct, but I always try to say, like as I said earlier, there's no experts. I'm not an expert.
Yeah. No, for sure.
If there ever is an expert on Bigfoot, it's going to be a man or a woman in a lab coat.
Yeah. Absolutely.
With one on the table.
Right.
And that's going to be your Bigfoot expert. And then the rest of us are just going to be, like I said, people with opinions that, those opinions might be obsolete at that point in time, when that happens. Yeah. And so, no experts, nobody, I don't care what kind of title they have before their name.
Yep.
There's no experts in Bigfoot.
Absolutely not. And I agree wholeheartedly. The other thing that I was going to say about that footage is that I remember years ago, somebody was attacking it on a thread where it was posted on social media somewhere, and I don't remember what site or anything like that, but they're like, "Oh, well, it's clearly fake. You can tell by his reaction." And I didn't know a lot about your dad, but I knew that he had been at this for a long time. And I was like, this wasn't his first rodeo. He's been doing this for a long time. And I assumed that he maybe had seen others. I didn't know about the first sighting at that time. But I was, but there again, unless you know the person, like I've been around people that have been through absolute tragedies and are like, oh boy, can you believe that? And then there's other people like, oh my God. So, I mean, there's a very individual reaction that you can't gauge just from these few seconds of footage, like, well, he's obviously telling the truth, or no, he's not excited enough. And it's like, how do you know this person so well? I mean, was your dad a pretty, was he an exuberant, loud personality, or was he just a real stoic personality? What was he like?
Well, he was a good old boy.
Yeah. There you
you
go.
know,
Yeah.
my dad had a big personality. He
Oh,
did.
sure.
He was good at telling stories and
Oh, I bet.
things like that, and he was well liked by people, but he wasn't overly excitable.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and plus, we talked about the 82 sighting, but some of the there's history that's in between, right? And there's another sighting in 1988.
Oh.
Like in 1988, my brother Dwayne and my dad actually deer hunting have a sighting together.
Oh, cool.
And so there's at least 2 sightings previous
Sure.
to this, potentially one more. And we, it's not his first rodeo, right?
Yeah.
He's been at this, and I think it's the initial, oh, there he goes. People don't like that. They don't like that for some reason.
Oh,
but
I love it.
After that, what does he say initially after that? He says, Jesus.
Yeah.
And the camera drops and he starts running and then he's shaking and then he's breathing heavily.
Yeah.
And so if you ignore the initial, oh, there he goes, he's pretty excited past that point.
Yeah.
And what's going on and like what he's saying. And people don't really pay attention to that. But I think it's funny because the, oh, there he goes, like, I've heard that deer hunting, right?
Yeah.
That's like something like that's my dad. That's the way he talked. That's the way that he would say. We would be deer hunting or bear hunting or something. Be like, oh, there he is.
Yep.
Like you know what I mean. And so that I think that was a natural like thing that's
an organic
that
reaction.
came out. But I've heard it's terrible acting, or this or that. It's like. You don't know. Number one, you don't know, right?
Yep.
And sometimes people kind of cast shade on it because they're like, well, why does he run at it? Isn't he scared? Doesn't like why would you run toward it? Oh, I don't know. Why did Roger Patterson run toward it?
Right. I mean, that's what
right.
That's what he was there for.
The 2 best examples of film we have are people that ran toward it.
Right.
Instead of like freaking out and running away from it. Yeah. But, it's one of those things. And in 82, he did freak out and fell down and tried to back up.
Yeah.
And by, 10 years later with all this research and having a sighting in between and all this stuff, I think it was one of those situations where it was, I'm going to prove to the world I don't care.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that was pretty much Roger's frame of mind, too, was that Roger Patterson wanted to show, that this is a real thing. And both of those guys, I got to give them credit because they had testicles of steel, I just can't imagine.
Well, it's in my book for anyone that's read my book or anything like that, because I have the audio of my dad talking and telling his own story in my book. But, one of the things that's in there is my dad describing like what he would tell my mother when he went out and when he was gone. Cause sometimes he was gone for a week or 2 at a time, even later, even in the 90s, after he moved back, he would be gone for the weekend and things like that. He would go and camp and research. And, this was pre-cell phone, right?
Sure.
We had a CB radio. He had one in his truck. We had one at the house. Okay. But basically, he would go out, he would CB radio my mom, if she was home or whatever, and basically tell her where the truck was parked. And that he'll contact her when he gets back. But, and I don't do a good enough job of talking about it, but if you listen to my dad's audio, it strikes me, of course, because I'm a son, it's my mom, and it's my family. But, he literally would tell my mother, if I don't come back, here's where you should start looking for the camera. Not me. Here's where you should look for the camera.
Wow.
And because he would tell my mom, if I don't come back or if they find my dead body, I want you to get that camera and don't give it to anyone because I will film until I can't film anymore.
Wow.
And whatever did this to me will be on that camera.
Yeah. Wow.
But this is where I'm parked. If I don't come home, this is where you need to start looking for me. And those are the type of things he would tell my mom. And then he'd be gone for a week or 2 and she wouldn't hear from me. We wouldn't know where he was.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden he would, CB radio, or he would just show up sweaty and dirty in his pickup, a week later and be like, well, I'm home.
Well, there it is.
And have some fresh footprints or whatever that he casts out there, or whatnot. But at that point in time, getting to my point, I think it was, I'm going to prove to the world that I'm not crazy. I'm going to film this thing and I'm going to run towards it, and whatever happens is what happens.
Wow. Okay. That's excellent. I think that speaks a lot to his frame of mind, that it was that important to him, and it drove him to finally realize that vision in the form of these films, and it's incredible stuff. And I don't envy in a lot of ways your having to grow up. Basically, the choices he made reflected on the whole family and were a burden for all of you to carry, but I without what he did, I think he was a very iconic figure in the Bigfoot's community and in these unknown worlds altogether. And his dedication and devotion really moved the needle forward, in my opinion. And I'm really grateful for that, because I think this is a very real phenomenon. I think there's something out there people are experiencing, and it takes somebody like that with such a vision and tenacity to bring back something to show the world, and he certainly did that. And I'm also really incredibly impressed by you taking up that mantle and to continue to promote what he did, because it would be so easy for that to get lost in time and in the archives of online media, and just this piece of history. But you're out there, you're talking about these experiences, you're bringing new life into it. You've written this incredible book, and could you please take some time to let people know about this, because I think it's a fantastic publication for sure.
Yeah, it's called the Freeman Bigfoot Files. And I did write it. And my dad, I've talked about having audio of him, that's in the book and talking. And what my dad did is he actually recorded his own story on cassette tapes in private. Okay, in private. It's not something he was doing and he was telling anybody about, including us. These are things that were found after he passed away, actually. But I have about 9 hours of him telling a story, and he mentions in his recordings that he's doing this because he's going to write a book. This was a book he was going to write. And unfortunately, my dad passed away, when he was 59 years old, and he never got to write a book. And so I did it for him. And included his audio and included his voice in there, with him talking. So you can listen to his story that he was recording, that he wanted to be a book. So, I mean, in essence, it at its heart, it's an evidence catalog more than it is, a book. It's an evidence catalog. It's got 110 full page pictures of casts and footprints and things like that in there that you can look at, and 2.5 hours of my dad telling his own story, and there's 2 hours of footage that he shot with his camera that you could watch, and the sighting, of course, the Deduct Spring footage, but there's other stuff. There's him just looking at tracks in '91, and there's footage of him and Dave Bean casting a handprint, and there's a 48-minute clip of him giving a presentation at the Western Bigfoot Society in 1997. And him giving presentations are very, very rare. Sure. And so there's some really good stuff in there, but it's my dad's book. I just put it out there for him.
Well, that's
but I think it's incredible. But to what you were saying, honestly, man, and I'll say this in all truth, that I feel as his son, there's always been a sense of duty to do this, and but in reality, a lot of people don't realize this. It can be an incredible burden.
Yeah.
Because, and I was just telling Cliff Berrickman the other day, we were just having this conversation. I spend my life defending a dead person.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it is an incredible burden to carry. And it's done because, there is some type of sense of duty that's, I want to get the correct information out there. I want to get the evidence out there. I want to get it enhanced. I want to present it to people that haven't seen it, and bring it to a new audience. And maybe we can never prove that, the footage is 100% real, but maybe we can prove that it's not fake.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
Like, let's do something, let's keep the ball rolling.
Well,
so, I don't do like a lot of podcasts anymore. And there was a time period when I was kind of under obligation to do a lot of them because I was promoting a book coming out and things like that. But I don't do a lot of them anymore. And I don't do an incredible amount of presentations, at conferences, 1 or 2 a year, usually, if that, right? And I'm not sure how many I'm doing moving forward.
Sure.
To be honest, podcasts or presentations. I appreciate anyone that wants to talk with me, though, and I appreciate anyone that has interest in, my father or anything like that. But as we touched on at the beginning, like, man, I'm just me. I'm just Michael Freeman, and my dad is the important person. Well, and my dad was the famous person. Sure. And all I am is a substitute that is just getting his information out there and making sure that it's kept in, the correct light. And my name's on the book, but it's my dad's book. It was done for him.
Oh, that's beautiful. The other big thing that I think is important, though, and I think it's the importance of you doing this, is in that just in this discussion, Paul Freeman is this figure that I was aware of, in talking with you a little bit and in seeing your presentation, it created more of a human being. But just that's the big thing, is that you've, rather than just this name with this footage, you've explained to me the person, and that's an amazing thing, because it's easy to dismiss an idea. But once you've had a chance to understand the person, it's like, now it becomes bigger and it becomes more powerful. And that's what I think a beautiful part of what you're doing is you are humanizing this man, and you are telling his story, and you are bringing us into that experience. And I again, on first blush, I was already on board. I'm like, this is real. I just believe this is real. But in talking with you and in learning about your father, yeah, I mean, it's just even so much more so. So I think, what you're doing is incredibly important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, everything that you said, I mean, that's why you do it, right?
Sure.
That's what I want people to realize.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's my dad.
Yeah.
It's not someone I idolize.
Sure.
It's not like a Bigfoot researcher that I look up to or that I've seen on TV or,
right.
Something like that. Like, I mean, it's my father, and, it's the person that raised me and all this stuff. And so I appreciate hearing those things, which I don't hear enough, honestly. There's not enough people tell me something like that. So I appreciate that. That's amazing, and it's wonderful. And I hate to cut you short, but I'm about out of time. So,
well, thank you so much. Where's the best place people can find the book, and also your cast that you do on social media?
I mean, the book can pretty much be bought anywhere that buy books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble online. You can go to Hanger One Publishing online. Okay. The North American Bigfoot Center, Cliff Barackman's museum in Boring, Oregon. He sells them online. Or you can contact me personally if you're so inclined. I will sell you one and sign it and autograph it for you and all that. I also, as you did mention there, have footprint cast replicas of the originals that I sell. I'm pretty easy to find. Facebook, Michael Freeman, that's me. Mm-hmm. I'm on Instagram, and it is mfreeman77 on Instagram. Or if you're so inclined, Freeman Bigfoot Files at gmail.com. Perfect. The name of my book as a Gmail address is my personal Bigfoot only email. So if you wanted to order something or just, chat Bigfoot, you can't find me on Facebook or something, you can email me at freemanbigfootfiles at gmail.com. Or you can contact Brent Thomas, and he will get you all that information.
Absolutely. One other clarification I want to put into this, during the interview when you're referring about the book, you're saying in there you can hear my dad explaining this stuff and see the footage. And the way that Michael did that was he put these exclusive links that you're able to access to be able to view these files and listen to them. So they're not actually they're probably in the book as well, but if you want to hear it and watch it, that is available through the book. So definitely check it out, ladies and gentlemen. Michael, thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it, and it's been an absolute pleasure, brother.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And, maybe we'll do it again down the road.
Perfect. I'm game. All right. Have a good day,
Thank
brother.
You as well.
All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. And remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net. And that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal. And you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal. Or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. Y'all take care, and remember, we love y'all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.